Police officers. Who's the smartest criminal you've ever encountered? I used to work at Chase Bank. At the time, upper management demanded that we bankers work the lobby, meaning we would grab people from the teller line and help them do their transactions. But it was just an excuse to try to get new accounts, credit cards, etc. On this particular day, it was midday and it was super busy. One of us, a female banker, got up to grab somebody from the line. She asked the man if he needed help, and he responded in Spanish. He said that he was okay with waiting, but she insisted that he come with her, so he followed. He sat down at her desk and handed her a note that said he had a bomb and that he was robbing the place. She looked at him and said, "Oh, you have to get in line for this." The guy did exactly as she told him. She went and told the manager on the teller side what was going on. He called the man over and opened a window specifically for him. She went to the bathroom to hyperventilate. The manager proceeded to give the bank robber somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,000. The guy left and ran a few blocks down where we assumed the getaway car was. Nobody knew what was going on. The phone started ringing and I picked it up. "This is Chase Corporate Security. We just received an alarm for your branch. Is everything okay?" Okay, that's funny. You got me. Who is that? Just then I looked up and started seeing a lot of commotion. A manager was locking doors and people were shifting around quickly. You know what? I think something did happen. I put them on hold and asked the manager, and he confirmed we were robbed. He then took the call. A week later, a similar situation happened at a bank down the street. This was just as they were opening. It had a different type of entrance, double doors on the main street, a foyer, and double doors into the branch. The robber went into the main street entrance, walked through the foyer, and realized the doors to enter the branch were locked. He knocked, someone walked over, and he slipped them the note, again. The employee read the note and was able to lock the street entrance from inside, effectively locking the student in the foyer. The employees all hustled out the back, the cops were called, and he was arrested without incident. It wasn't the same guy who robbed us, but the ammo was the same. Spanish-speaking with a perfectly crafted note in English. The cops asked him where he got the note, and he said that some guys picked him up at a labor site and told him that he would make $1,000 just for dropping off this note. Because he didn't speak English, he didn't know what the note said. I don't know if they ever hit another bank or if they were ever caught, but that has always stuck out to me as one of the smartest crimes. They picked up somebody who was completely unassuming and who didn't know them whatsoever. They gave him vague instructions with a note that he couldn't understand. And I'm sure once the transaction was complete, they dropped him off at the labor site and moved on with their lives. Story 2. Not a copper, but this was pretty smart. I used to run bars at a number of venues around the north of England, one of which was Chester Racecourse. Usually we just kept an eye out for scousers trying to nick drinks or sneak in without paying. With it being so close to Liverpool, there was a fair amount of security on site. You could tell them by their suits, boots, high-vis waistcoats, and usually carrying radios. There were a dozen or so bars dotted around the course, and you can imagine the amount of money taken from 100,000 or so punters drinking steadily for 11 until 8 or 9 in the evening. So every hour or so, the security would go around the bars in turn, take all the high-denomination notes from each till and stick them in the safe in the main building. One day I was standing there, pulling pints and doing the barman thing. The security blokes had been around a few times and it was getting steadily busier. Then one guy showed up on his own wearing a high-vis and carrying a radio. He did the till, leaving the usual receipt so we could balance it up at the end of the meeting. Bit early, I thought, but hey-oh, I had plenty to do. Then 10 minutes or so later, 2 more guys showed up, dressed the same. "Oh, your mate's just been here," I said. "No need to touch that just yet." "What mate? We're the only 2 doing this duty today." Cue a rapid-fire and increasingly panicked exchange over the radio. The matey boy who'd done the till before he used to work there, apparently. He knew the drill, had been watching the guards, and knew just when to time it and what order they were going around the bars. Apparently he got around 9 or 10 bars before he decided not to push his luck any further and walked away with about 80 grand, as we heard later. He just took off the high-vis, dumped that in the radio, and blended in just one more guy in a suit in a crowd of thousands. They were a bit stricter on the procedure after that. Story 3. Close to 20 years ago, a guy on Australia's Gold Coast got away with a bank robbery in broad daylight. He had cased the bank for a while and discovered a pattern. The bank manager arrived about 30 minutes before anyone else each morning. During this time, the manager would leave the front doors unlocked so staff could help themselves in without needing a key or waiting for the boss to come and let them in. One morning, the crook dressed himself up for a busy day of office work and waited for the bank manager to arrive. As the manager was unlocking the door, he made his move, entering the building and approaching the manager with a gun. He got all the details he needed to access the vault and so forth, then tied the manager up and put him in his office. When the staff arrived, he told them that the manager had called in sick and that the regional office had sent him in to do the opening. No one batted an eyelid. This bank had a small walk-in vault that normally held about 30 to 50,000 on any given day. But he had timed his robbery for the morning after business banking day when all the local small businesses made their end-of-week deposits. Reportedly, he got a score of close to 250,000. Once the vault was open, he pulled his weapon out, invited all the staff to enter the vault, and locked them in. By this stage, the bank was due to be open, so when he went to leave, there were a number of customers waiting to get inside to do their banking. He told them that there had been an issue with the computers and that the tech team estimated it would take about 30 minutes to resolve the issue, so they couldn't open until then. Then he got into his car, drove straight to the airport, and flew to Hong Kong, where he disappeared. To my knowledge, the cops never caught him and never managed to find the money. They knew he would have had to leave most of it in Australia because you can only take 10,000 Australian dollars in cash and any currency out of the country before customs pulls you into their interview rooms. The assumption was that he had an accomplice in Australia who would funnel the money to him slowly over time. Anyway, he was identified later after witness statements and CCTV footage led to his getaway car being discovered at the airport, where he boarded a plane destined for Hong Kong, which is as far as they could track him. That's some now you see me now you don't crap. Story 4. I knew this guy back in the early 80s, let's call him Jim. He really wanted this high-powered superbike, but he knew he could never afford it. So he drove to London and scouted around for a few days until he found a particular model parked outside a house. He went back that night with a slide hammer, pulled the lock, and stole the bike. He got it home, put it in his garage, and completely stripped it so that the only thing left was the frame and the bottom half of the engine, which he dragged into the plants at the bottom of his garden. Then he poured fuel over it and burned it a bit. A few weeks passed, and plants started growing over it. At that point, he called the cops and reported that someone had dumped a bike frame in his garden. The cops showed up and he explained that he had just gone back from being away and found it. The cops took the frame and noted down his name and address. A few days later, the cops called him and said that the bike had been stolen from London a month or so ago, from the serial number on the bottom half of the engine and frame, and that the insurance company had classified the bike as a write-off and had told the cops to dispose of it. Because the frame was found in his garden and the insurance company didn't want it, the cops were duty-bound to ask him if he wanted to keep it or if they should throw it away. So he told them that he had always wanted to build a bike. He got the frame back from them, repainted it, then put it all back together and re-registered it as a Q-Reg, stolen and recovered. I forgot to call him Jim, didn't I? Well, that is one patient criminal. Story 5. I'm not a cop, but this is probably one of the smartest robberies in my small city. One of the main streets was cut into a hillside. As a result, there was a very steep and quite tall concrete-covered bank immediately behind the buildings. Between two buildings, there was a gap that was filled at the street end by an ATM. To access it for filling, the security staff went through the next door building, out a side door and into the gap, which had the ATM at one end and the steep bank at the other. On the Friday before Christmas, when the ATM was to be filled to the brim, one of the robbers abseiled down the bank at night into the gap and waited for the security team to arrive to fill the ATM. They came early in the morning. As they came through the door into the gap, he held them up, took the money, and escaped through the building to an accomplice waiting in a van on the main street. The van then took off on the main road out of the city and vanished. After a big search, the police finally found the burnt-out van. It turned out the gang had driven it up a gorge road and had two other accomplices in cars at the top and bottom of the gorge who, simultaneously, drove really slowly into the gorge, holding up the traffic so that no one was there to see them when they turned off down an access road into some bush. They ended up being caught because one of the gang members was a former employee of the security company. Story 6. Not a cop, but this one made the news, and I literally lived on that road. Council officials in Newport were trying to discover who planted grass in flower pots put out to brighten up the city. More than 20 of the illegal plants were discovered nestling amongst begonias and petunias in the street flower displays. But by the time the police were told and went to examine the specimens, they had already been harvested. The council said it was checking CCTV footage to find the culprits. I'd never seen grass growing in the wild before, so it was crazy to see it. Said local businessman Dean Bettis, who made the discovery, "It's actually rather a beautiful plant and stood out wonderfully. But they have gone now. I don't know who took them." The leafy plants were growing in the open view of passers-by in some of the city's busiest streets. Newport councillor Reese Hutchings, also a member of the band Goldie Lick and Chain, said he thought local teenagers were to blame. "It's either kids or the Newport underworld community. I'm pretty sure it's not Alan Titchmarsh," he joked, but city council officials had taken a dim view of the green-fingered criminals. "It's a serious issue, and we will be informing the police and checking our CCTV cameras," said a spokesperson. Gwen police said that the fact that the plants had now gone was problematic. Now that the plants have apparently disappeared, it's difficult to determine where they were. In fact, illegal grass plants or not, and if so, whether they had been deliberately planted for cultivation, said a spokesperson. A secret herb garden? Yeah, that's some criminal masterpiece right there. More cunning stories are up next after this short break. So don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you won't miss future uploads like this one. Story 7. Dude noticed that the bank vault had put its safety deposit box in such a way that there was a space at the 90-degree point where the wall meets the wall. He timed it on a Friday and climbed and hid in that spot. He actually rented out a box which he put a clock in, which alarms violently, to see if there are sound sensors in the vault. He waited outside, but there was nothing. The employees closed the vault with him inside. He had the whole weekend and got to knocking the locks out with a hammer one at a time and stole everything. He then replaced the locks to look like they were not tampered with and jumped back into the spot. Monday morning, the vault was open. It turns out the bank was doing renovations. He picked that day. He threw on a worker's jacket and literally walked out of the bank. Employees did not notice until the first person came to open a safety deposit box. The lock fell in. They could not identify who did it, and he would have gone away with it, save for his big mouth. It turns out he was a hairdresser and kept telling his customers how he stole from the bank. He was a genius, and they would never catch him. Someone snitched, and he was picked up. They could not value what he stole as safety box contents are unknown. Because of this dude, all banks now fill the space where the two safety cabinets meet with concrete. They made a movie called Inside Man, loosely based on him. His name was William Smarto. Story 8. My friend's older brother and his friends used to rob cars. They never did it anywhere except for movie theaters because they guaranteed those people wouldn't come back out for 2 hours. They'd take their girlfriends, 2 guys, 2 girls, wait in the car and hang out until they saw a car with too much money, usually booming bass and loud music, which guaranteed a few grand worth of stereo equipment. They'd wait until the driver went in, give it another 30 minutes just to be safe, then all walk over together and use a center punch to knock out the driver's window and push it into the seat in one piece. Immediately, they'd open the doors and cut the alarm wires if there was an alarm going off, and just start hanging out. Even if someone on the lot noticed the alarm and turned to look, they just saw 2 guys and 2 girls near a car with the doors open, looking like the driver was an idiot who forgot to shut off his alarm, which was confirmed when it was off in a few seconds. Then they'd proceed to just clean out the car. Usually amps, subs, speakers, etc., are right in broad daylight. With 4 of them, it just looked like some guys working on their stereo. They'd close the doors and then leave. They did this for a year or 2 before eventually getting caught because a father was waiting for his kids to come out and saw the entire process happen. They did some time. It was one of the smartest and stupidest things I'd ever heard about. Story 9. There was an incident in Fargo, ND where a guy wanted to steal electronics equipment. The store had plenty of alarms on it, and generally, cutting an alarm triggers an alarm, so instead, he cut all the alarms. This was before cell phones were really widespread and alarms were usually just connected to the phone line. He found an access point to one of the phone company's big truck lines. Massive, thick copper cables with tens of thousands of lines running through them. He cut through the whole thing with a circular saw, knocked out phone service to most of the town, and robbed an audio store during the ensuing chaos. There were no leads until a tip came in from another town, where he'd pulled something similar. They hadn't been able to pin that to him, but had strong suspicions, and he'd relocated to Fargo. So the cops paid him a visit. He refused to let them in because they didn't have a warrant, so the cops left to get one without leaving anyone to watch him, and he split. When they came back, they found the saw coated in copper dust and a lot of the stolen stuff. He was in the wind for a while, but even after he got caught, he had another card to play. While being transported between prisons, he used a key he'd made to unlock his shackles and climbed out of the roof vent of the bus. Story 10. A guy, let's call him Dave, I worked with, told this story. He was working at a Mercedes dealership. He was sitting at his desk when this well-dressed gentleman came in and asked if he could test drive a specific car that was parked out front. It was also a busy day. Usually they were allowed to let people test drive by themselves after they've taken some form of deposit or something, maybe the official ID or something, not really relevant. So Dave gave out the keys. The guy went on his test drive and came back a reasonable amount of time later. He walked in, handed off the key, and got his deposit or whatever back. This was about closing time, possibly even on a Friday. Everything was in order. Fast forward to the next business day. Dave's boss walked in and realized that one of the Mercedes out front was gone. Dave had to explain that the car was returned and that they had a key and everything. It turned out the criminal hadn't test driven. He had driven somewhere to create a replica of the key and given that replica back to the desk. Had kept the real key. Story 11. I used to work with a guy who had a lengthy record. Had a system for getting released if he got caught. After committing a crime, if the police were in pursuit and he knew he was about to be cornered, he would act insane. His girl would play along with it, telling the police he was off his medication. The police would arrest him but then send him to a mental ward with papers instructing the ward to release him to the police once he was cleared. Once he was in the mental ward, he would cause a distraction that would make the person attending the desk with a file cabinet leave said cabinet. He would then crawl to the file cabinet, look for his release to police papers, and ingest them. When the psych evaluators decided that he was stable enough to be released, there would be no instructions to send him to the police, and he would be released to the general public. He did this about 10 times until police officers noticed him back on the streets. This stunt forced the state to change its procedure for detaining mentally unstable suspects. Story 12. Most of them were really stupid, so this guy wasn't a criminal mastermind, but here goes. He wanted to rob a jeweler's on our city's main street. So he found out the flat beside the jeweler's was empty and he hid there. For 2 weeks, he triggered the alarm on purpose several times a night, causing a massive headache for the police and the business. We turned up to see nothing there, nothing on the cameras, and thought it was just a fluke. So the jewelers turned off the alarm system and said they'd wait until the morning to get a new one installed or the one rewired before something wasn't right. As soon as he heard that and the police were leaving, he tore down the wall. He'd already been working on this, apparently, and robbed the place, taking his sweet time. He escaped without anyone noticing anything for hours, until the jewelers came back in the morning. Then he tried to resell something he stole, which had a serial number on it, and got caught. So not that smart after all. Good effort, though. Story 13. One guy printed barcodes, brought them into Home Depot, and stuck them on the merchandise in the $100 range. When scanned, the items came up in the $10 range. Putting random barcodes on things wasn't really illegal and was super hard to notice. The guy, too, came in an hour later and bought the underpriced stuff, ensuring complete plausible deniability. They then sold the stuff on eBay. The only reason they got caught was that the guy with the barcode printer and software cut the second guy out of the operation. In retaliation, Guy 2 stole a bunch of barcodes, put them on the merchandise, and paid for it immediately afterward. He then proceeded to rat on the first guy and revealed that they had been doing this on a weekly basis for over 4 years. Because we could only pin the one case on him, the burglary charge was dropped down to petty theft, and he walked away with a few days in county jail and a small fine. The dude probably took Home Depot for tens of thousands over the years. What is the real meaning of smart in the context of crime anyway? Intelligence isn't everything, especially when it comes to ethical choices. But hey, if you enjoy this series of unorthodox geniuses, you'll love the next video. Cops. What crime was so cool that you didn't arrest the criminal? Story 1 is insanely creative. See you there.